carried out. Thank you for joining us today to explore one of the most pressing issues of our day, climate change. I was asked to prepare a few brief words on how climate change will impact museums and how museums can support the fight for climate action. It is so important that we're discussing how to prepare for climate change today, because this is an issue that cannot wait until tomorrow. Between the 4 panelists that are joining us today and myself, only one of us will have an office that will not be below sea level by the end of this century. And that person, by the way, is located in Edmonton. We are currently on a path that will lead to catastrophic climate change, but it's not too late to imagine a brighter future. Museums, galleries, and heritage organizations are trusted institutions that help communities better understand the past. And we can use this trust to empower our communities to take action to fight against climate change. I hope today's webinar inspires us all to work towards a bright, sustainable future. Today's webinar topic is climate change, implications for your museum practice. And today we are pleased to have with us members of the Coalition for Museums for Climate Justice, who will be discussing different ways museums are addressing the issue of climate change at their museums. Peter Ord and David Jensen, 2 of the 4 presenters today, were at the BCMA's conference in Prince George last month, where they led a very engaging discussion on this topic. We look forward to continuing this discussion today. And speaking of the BCMA's annual conference, I'm very pleased to announce that while we haven't set the exact topic for our 2020 annual conference, our 2020 annual conference in Surrey will explore climate change to a significant degree. Also, as you all know, our webinar series would not be possible without the support of our sponsor, Lucidia. Lucidia is a software solutions company based in Richmond, BC. They develop collections and management software systems that are suitable for libraries, archives, and museums, both small and large. Lucidia's motto is redefining how knowledge is shared, and we thank Lucidia for supporting the BCMA as we seek to share knowledge through this webinar series. I'm very glad to be your host today. My name is Ryan Hunt, and I'm the BCMA's new Executive Director. I've had the opportunity to meet some of the people attending today's webinar, and I look forward to continuing to meet new members of our community and getting to know how I can best serve the museum community in my role as ED here. I'm very excited to be hosting BCMA's webinar today. But before we begin, I have a bit of housekeeping for those who may be new to this webinar platform. If you're reading this slide and hearing me, you're doing great. But if you can't, let us know by phoning the office or texting Anissa, who's standing by to assist. Throughout this webinar, we'll welcome questions and comments, so simply use the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. It may be hidden for you, so hold the mouse either at the top or the bottom of your screen, and the feature menu should emerge. Then go ahead and type your question into the chat box. At the end of the presentation, we will read your comments or questions out to the panelists. Okay, so I'm very pleased to announce this month's presenters. They are Peter Ord, Executive Director of the Robert Bateman Center, David Jensen, Principal and Chief Exhibit Designer of D. Jensen and Associates Limited, Viviane Gosselin, the Director of Collections and Exhibitions at the Museum of Vancouver, and Jennifer Bawden, Senior Manager of New Galleries and Research at the TELUS World of Science in Edmonton. We are so excited to have you all here today with us. Today's presentation will likely take the full hour, maybe slightly more, and Peter Ord will be introducing each speaker, and each speaker will have 10 minutes to discuss in particular their project. Then we will open up for questions and answers at the end. So without much further ado, Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Ryan. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the special webinar. We're honored on behalf of the Canadian Museums for Climate Justice and on behalf of Viviane and Jennifer to present today. What I'll do is I'll briefly introduce each of the participants, and then I'll talk a little bit of context around what's happening with regards to the webinar. So first of all, we'll be having Viviane Gosselin speaking. She is Director of Collections and Exhibitions at the Museum of Vancouver. She joined the MOV's team in 2010. Her work on historical and environmental literacy seeks to make the museums a more responsive, empathetic, and democratic public space that prompts people to recognize their own capacity to affect positive social change. Viviane has authored several articles on participatory museology and intercultural curation, and is currently writing on the potential applications of a permaculture principles in museum work. Viviane is currently involved in developing sustainable exhibition design practices with a team of city staff, architects, and designers committed to creating a no-waste city. Our second presenter is Jennifer Bawden from the TELUS World of Science in Edmonton. Jennifer has a background in microbiology and immunology, history of science and technology, and museum studies. Jen has worked at TELUS World of Science in Edmonton for 9 years on the programming side as both a staff scientist and the science director, where she developed programs like Research Zone. Now, as senior manager, new galleries and research, she leads the development of content for exhibit galleries and assesses the impact programs and exhibits have on guests. David Jensen is principal and chief exhibit designer for D. Jensen Associates. David brings a broad range of exhibit design experience to his initiative, including design, facilitation, coordination, and management. In his over 40 years as principal of D. Jensen Associates, David has chosen to work on exhibits presenting science, culture, history, indigenous stories, art, and nature. He approaches his work with dedication and commitment and was honored to be the recipient of the BCMA's Golden Anniversary Service Award in 2007, the BCMA Distinguished Service Award in 2013, and award of Distinguished Service from the Canadian Museums Association 2014. And also, just to highlight that, David proudly serves as co-chair of the Coalition of Museums for Climate Justice. This organization was formed by Dr. Robert James as a response to the realization that we have to do more about climate change. For the last few years, the CMCJ Advisory Group have been actively involved in social media, museum conference sessions, and networking with people in museums nationally and internationally. So thank you all for participating. Just below you on your slide, you'll see there is a bit more information about the coalition, including our blog address, Twitter, and Facebook. If you could change the next slide, please. Oh, you can go back one more slide, please. There we go. So today, most of the presentation will be done by Viviane, Jennifer, and David. What I'll be doing, just sort of outlining a little bit of the context for why we're here. So it's really the climate, the Canadian Museums of Climate Change is a national group. There are multiple sort of initiatives happening around the country. But what we want to do is we want to look at sort of expanding a bit more into BC. The British Columbia, I'm not sure if a lot of you are aware that might be a little bit behind the curve when it comes down to initiating sort of climate change initiatives, particularly within the sector. If we look at other areas like Alberta Museum Association and their Sustainability Working Group, which was formed in 2012, they put together a really amazing advanced role in how museums can participate in this initiative. And a great sort of template for us to follow as a sector in the province also is the Green Museums Accord that the California Museums Association started putting together in 2006. So the whole idea is that how can we advance this discussion within BC? As Ryan mentioned, David, myself, and Tracy Calagueros did a presentation in Prince George. This webinar is part of that pursuit. And then looking into 2020, we'd like to see this discussion taken up more fully by participants at the conference in Surrey, and then the BCMA Council to perhaps use it as a way to develop our own BC charter. So the three broad themes that are going to be talked about today is sort of, if you could break down the issues of climate change in our operations. They can be looked at, what is sustainability in our operations? What does that look like? And you'll be hearing some great examples today. Also, what is it that we can do to put more messaging in our exhibits and programs? How can we ensure climate change and sustainability is sort of rooted or baked in a lot of our programs, particularly with that focus? And then I think probably more importantly is, what does advocacy in our own communities, doesn't matter what community, large or small, what can we as a trusted organization within our communities do in order to advance those discussions, either on a very neutral basis or certainly advocating on behalf of our either municipalities or other organizations or partners. And then, of course, feeding that into a greater regional discussion around BC. Just a little bit about some of the practice here at the Bateman Foundation Museum of Nature. If you could, next slide, please. This is us. We are based in the Steamship Building in the Inner Harbor of Victoria. We started in 2012, and we were started by our patron, Robert Bateman, iconic Canadian artist and environmentalist. Next slide, please. With regards to our operations, we focus as much as we can on delivering as zero carbon operation as much as possible. We're guided through the Synergy Sustainability Institute, and as you can see, there's a little bit of description there. This is something that's mostly based on Vancouver Island, and what they provide is a sort of like a task list or a guide for operations, not just museums and galleries, of course, but all sorts of businesses to follow some sort of actions within our, everything from our operations, staffing, retail, in order to meet some a green sustainability level. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, this slide didn't come out very well, but this just gives you a sort of that snapshot of what that checklist looks like. This is something that's really helpful for us. It offers some sort of overview, so almost industry assessed standard that we can follow. I'd advocate, if you have something similar in your own communities, to follow the same thing. Next slide, please. And then when it comes down to programs and exhibits, for us, well, as you can imagine, the Gallery of Nature, we tend to focus on artwork that speaks to the role of the environment and the natural world. Our mission is to engage people to the beauty of nature through the lens of art. And these are just some of the examples of exhibits we've had. Our last one was Into the Arctic, a very strong exhibition by Corey Trepanier that looked at landscapes of the Arctic and how they're changing. Next slide, please. And then our main program that we deliver across Canada in 7 different cities, including the Arctic, in Tuktoyaktuk, is our Nature Sketch program, where we get kids and families out in nature, teach them about the world around them, natural world, and then use art and sketching for them to engage. And we partner with groups like the Anxiety Canada and the World Wildlife Fund to do this. Next slide, please. And as part of our advocacy work, we are part of a group here in Victoria called the Naturehood, Victoria Naturehood, where we work with government agencies, retail, commercial partners, and we look at how nature within the context of our community can be used to engage people to the importance of what the natural world offers. And these are just other examples of our work with Monarch Nation on advancing species at risk education, with the Grizzly Foundation on helping to sustain the grizzly population in BC, and World Wildlife Fund, where we do our nature sketch programs at over 3,000 schools nationally. So that's just a snapshot of kind of what the Bateman Foundation does with regards to addressing operations, advocacy, and exhibit programs. Thank you. So what I'd like to do now is just present our next presenter, or our first major presenter, and that is Viviane Gosselin from the Museum of Vancouver. Over to you, Viviane.
All right. Hello. Thanks, Peter. And thank you, BCMA, for creating these opportunities to learn from each other. So I'm just going to do this here now. Share. Can you see the play here? That should help. And how is this? So can you hear me? Okay, so I'll jump right in. The Museum of Vancouver, its team has committed to reducing, reusing, and extending the life of construction materials by establishing new design and fabrication guidelines for the production of its exhibition. So I'll be talking about this journey that started about 2 years ago. But a bit of context. this initiative aligns with the City of Vancouver's efforts to create a circular economy. So circular economy is an economic system where waste is minimized and resources are maximized by reusing products and materials and reworking production chains. So in 2018, Vancouver was the first city in the world to approve a comprehensive plan to become a zero waste city by 2040. So we want to be part of this. And of course, the museum, has been creating climate friendly, like themed programs, but we wanted to create processes across the museum. So through curatorial, administration, fabrication, gift shop, and programming. So I'm going to zoom in now in our case study, if you want. It's Wild Things, The Power of Nature in Our Lives is a temporary exhibition for 1,000 square foot. It opened a year and a half ago, and for those who haven't seen it yet, it's going to be open until mid-January of 2020. It was co-produced with Nature Vancouver, a non-for-profit organization committed to environmental education. It was our first exhibition at MOV to physically embody the idea of sustainability by making extensive use of reclaimed materials. So, we have developed over the past few years ecologically and climate-themed exhibitions and programs, like I said. But prior to Wild Things, much of our exhibition material after closing day would end up in the waste bin. And I want to say also, this is part of formalizing a policy. So this was kind of Wild Things was our prototype. So we were, really attentive to identifying processes and systems required to implement real changes in the way we do design and build at MOV. So I'll just give you a quick tour of Wild Things. The exhibition examines the relationship between urbanites and their natural surroundings. It pays particular attention to personal stories of encounters with nature. And we wanted to capitalize on the power of storytelling to evoke a range of emotions associated with meeting nature face to face and creating a space for thinking about personal connection and disconnections to nature in the city. Those drawings help to kind of visualize, so 2 galleries of equal size. The encounter room, very immersive experience with very little text. It focuses on first person's accounts of encounters with wildlife. So there was a series of small installations that capture these visceral experiences and memorable moments. The other room that we refer to as the engagement room was kind of the counterpoint. So from feeling and experiencing, you dig deeper to make sense of the natural world around you. Some photographs. So you see here extirpated Vancouver mammals on build structures with clear, hard lines, kind of evoking the city. The elk story, which talks about the importance of hunting today for a Squamish family. We have the rain story, where visitors would listen to the sounds of rain, watch animations, and so kind of a contemplation moment. We had climb in the wall, so opportunities to do a bit like what you do in nature. You climb, you crawl, and so there were lots of these opportunities in Wild Things. And we had the engagement room that was structures around 4 broad themes tied to the interconnections between all living things. And this, I should mention, was a highly collaborative process. So those themes were kind of emerged from community consultations. And we have crowdsourced analog and digital platforms. In this case here, people indicated wildlife hotspots in Greater Vancouver. So the journey involved in rethinking our building practice to reduce our carbon footprint started with locating designers and fabricators who are keen and invested in developing eco-design practice. The big thing, the big shock, was how do we locate a critical mass of reclaimed material? if we can't go to the lumber store anymore to buy construction material? So part of the answer was, you need to know your deconstruction community. So what is a deconstruction community? It's there are organizations, private businesses involved in mining, retrieving, sorting, cleaning up, redistributing, and reselling building materials for a future reuse or recycling. Just as a reference, as much as 40% of Vancouver's waste come from the demolitions of homes and other buildings. So now new city bylaws support deconstructions, which in turn has helped divest several tons of material from the landfill. In our quest for used material, we learned that we were not going to find a one-stop shop. So organizations that specialize in salvage materials could rarely tell us when their next shipment of framing lumber or plywood sheet would arrive. So after weeks of site visit and pestering the deconstruction people, I started receiving calls from imminent shipments. And in the case of Wild Things, we struck gold at one point with structural wood and over 60 sheets of plywood and conglomerate that had been used on a film set. A big thing now. So we have the material, but it costs nothing to usually buy it if it comes from deconstruction communities, but we have to rent a truck and hire a contractor to deliver the supplies to the museum and prep them. So disassemble, cut, clean, make them ready for fabrication. So what we saved on the purchase price was largely offset by the cost of delivery and preparation. So in the end, the displays in the first gallery, the encounter room, met our target of 70% use of reclaimed material. The second gallery, the engagement gallery, approximately 30% of the displays used salvage material. So, but we use a deconstruction plan in place for all the material used in the exhibition. Now I'll talk about what is a deconstruction plan very soon. In thinking it when we design and built, we constantly have to think about the post-exhibition, if you know what happened to the materials. So a deconstruction mindset can be applied to design and architecture. So that means using systems that aid the dismantling, the recovery, and eventual reuse of building materials. So for example, you use clips and screws instead of nails and glues and staples to assemble the material and make it easier to take them apart. So you have to make a deconstruction plan. So it's one thing to extend the life of building materials to the final day of our exhibition, but it's another to keep them from the waste bin afterwards. So how, so making a deconstruction plan means that you know how to reuse each exhibit unit ahead of time. For example, it could be you disassemble it for the reuse in an upcoming exhibition, or you offer it to other departments or other institutions. Build an inventory. So, but first, you can't build an inventory of material if you don't have space. So storage space is a huge deal. Storage space is always limited in museum, and stocking large quantities of material ahead of time, say 2 or 3 years ahead of time, is not usually an option. So last spring, we acquired a large shipping container, a 40-footer, to use for storage in our parking lot. And this is an external storage like that has the merit of being removed from the building, so it reduces risk of pest infestation in the galleries and collection storage, which of course makes our conservator very happy. But no more ordering at the nearest lumberyard means that we have to adjust to sporadic availability. So when there's good material, we acquire it and we stock it for future projects. Foremost, in order to change and bring practices, you need to build a team. So the idea is to involve staffs and volunteers and contractors in this process. So the storage container was actually a great example of cross-departmental work, where you had admin staff keen to apply for grants and sponsorship to buy and beautify the container. We were able to, thanks to a city grant, we were able to commission an Indigenous artist, Ronnie Dean Harris, who beautified the container by creating a 4-sided mural. The mural depicts a sturgeon, referencing what Indigenous people locally used to be able to fish. They were used to be able to fish the sturgeon when Vancouver was much wilder. And that is at the very side of the museum. We had communication and marketing staff doing play-by-play on like kind of the upcycling of the material, but also the creation of the mural. Fabrication staff did a great job maximizing this space and locating people in our deconstruction network to start stocking for upcoming shows. And I would say there's also programming. So there's offshoots of programs that kind of took a reflective stance on designing using eco-design principles. So it's teamwork and it's incremental, but it has to be in order to be systemic and durable. So that's it for me. And over to you, Jennifer.
Great. All right, can everyone see that? I think so, hey? Perfect. So thanks for inviting me to speak. I'm going to give you a little bit of a perspective from one province over, a very energy-focused province, and that I think really influences some of how we tackle and communicate climate change over here. So for a bit of background for those who might not be familiar, I work at TELUS World of Science Edmonton. I'm the Senior Manager of New Galleries and Research, and we are a broad-based science center. So we're, I would say, medium to large-sized institution, and we cover a really wide range of science topics. We are also in the midst of a $41.5 million capital campaign, and we're sort of towards the end of it. This is the model of our building here. We've been able to complete renovations for almost all of our existing galleries at this point. As we've gone through, we've been thinking about sustainability a lot, actually. So we don't have all the answers, but I can share with you a little bit of the process that we're in right now. We've thought a little bit about how we're disposing materials. We're not at the same level as Viviane and her team. That was a really great example. But we have a couple of really practical ones, again, where we've been able to reuse some construction materials in galleries or share materials with other local museums. Actually, that is a really great opportunity. And as part of this renovation, we're also building an expansion that will house an Arctic gallery. For us, you can maybe tell from the outset that this expansion includes a re-landscaping. So we're moving away from a hardscaped external environment, connecting to more Indigenous plants. Our park is quite curated. It's a testing area for the city of Edmonton to test trees. They use some pesticides, so we don't see a lot of curious insects and things like that. We're exploring opportunities for things like rainwater collection, and we're thinking as well about how overt we want to be with our sustainability message. We've been talking about how we want to perhaps use position statements inside of our building, and they've been inspired, those conversations, by the Science Museum of Minnesota. This is right at the entry of their gallery, or of their building. They have a statement on global climate change, so I thought I would share it with you. They have others around evolution and diversity and inclusion, but this climate change one in particular has been interesting for us to reflect on. We've also been working with our architects who are dialogue design to think about how built environment impacts our health and well-being, and dialogue, along with the Conference Board of Canada, put together this framework for community well-being. If you Google it, you'll find a really comprehensive report and more detail about these. I mean, environment is highlighted, and I think that climate change and environmentalism, although not explicit, are really woven into this framework. So thinking about, in the social category, in that orange one, they talk about welcoming spaces. In the light blue and cultural, they talk about learning spaces, and both of those, you know, if you start thinking about how biophilia and nature interplay, they're important components of your health and well-being. So I think there is a connection there. I'll switch for frameworks for a second and talk a little bit about a gallery that exists. So we do have an environment gallery in play. As we built this space, we did use some reclaimed materials. So there's a lot of cardboard. All the signage is made of cardboard, recycled cardboard. And we sort of took the approach, instead of being really in your face about climate change, we wanted to get guests to think about how we know what we know about climate science. I did do a little bit of evaluation at the outset of the project to see how people felt about climate change here in Alberta. I'm sure, as you can imagine, there was a diversity of opinions. I certainly got yelled at a little bit, but it was a good marker for us to help position this gallery. And sort of within that, you know that climate change is a really personal topic here in Alberta, as it is in many places. And while the science is settled, really it's about more than the science, right? It's personal, it's financial, and understanding that prior personal context, of course, is always really important in any interpretation that we as museums do. But we found that sort of by helping people understand how scientists understand this information, that they can get a better sense of how to understand some of the results and the interpretations that scientists make with that data. I mentioned an Arctic gallery, and with that, we're really conscious of taking an approach that isn't disempowering. So we're in the very early design of it right now, but we're thinking about some of the interplay between global and local influences. We're talking about change, right? Change is an underlying theme, whether it's seasonal change in the Arctic or climate change in the Arctic. And I flagged this in Zovu Curve. I don't know if anyone here has read the latest AAM exhibition journal, but there's an article in there. OMSI has a permafrost exhibit that talks about climate change quite heavily, and they use this visitor engagement model, this curve. It was developed at museums that do work around genocide, and the intention behind it is helping people move from empathy through to action. So it's very easy to get a sense of helplessness and get caught in an empathy stage and burn out, which is sort of the bottom of the curve there. But at a couple of reflection points, those markers of epiphany and will, you can move someone through to action. And that's sort of, I thought that was an interesting point. We haven't explored it too much, but I thought it could be an interesting discussion piece to maybe you can take back within your own workplaces or here later to think about how that could apply with a climate change perspective here in Canada. I also, I'll switch focus again and talk a bit about some of our programs. So we run a science communication program. This is a researcher from our research zone where we bring professional scientists, grad students together. They learn about how people learn at informal learning sites. They learn how to facilitate. Along the way, they build their own hands-on activity that they walk away with. And the final session, this one is a public showcase with those activities. So this program generally has a lot of value for us. It lets us bring in real scientists to the center and talk about real science and real research that's often very local as well. So you get that nice connection. And we, wherever possible, do try to leverage these kinds of partnerships. We think it's really valuable for our guests because we don't really do science at the Science Center. We're not carrying out our own research besides on our guests. This allows our guests to connect directly with those knowledge, those subject matter experts. And our actually past two iterations have been able to really strongly connect to climate change. So we've had an NRCan grant that again was connected to science, to climate change, and then working with future energy systems. So this does not look like climate change, but this researcher works on methanotrophs, so bacteria that like to eat methane, which is a sort of part of a future energy systems research area at the University of Alberta. So often that sort of energy approach is how we explore climate change. It's a little bit maybe not quite so head on, but also has some more practical and tangible outcomes for people that people in Alberta can connect to a little better, I often find. This is my you'll have to excuse my drawing, but one of the exercises we do with that course is talking about the why and getting scientists to shift their mindset from, that traditional paper structure of the background, the methodology, the results, to thinking how the public thinks, right? They want to know that bottom line, the so what, and then thinking about how that changes if you are a funder versus a kid versus a politician, and thinking about all of those different audiences, all of those things that we do. But if you do have those external experts in, sometimes you have to get them to think a little bit differently. A couple of the other programming opportunities we participate in really quickly are things like International Science Center and Science Museum Day, which is on November 10th. We often celebrate internal programming, so that picture on the right is a touch tank we have where we get to build some empathy with nature. And the picture on the left is the University of Alberta hydrogen fuel cell car. So bringing in subject matter experts who can provide deeper content and different knowledge sets than we might be able to showcase at the Science Center. And this International Science Center Day looks at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is, I think, another really interesting perspective that you can use to approach climate change. And I think for us, it came to understand that a lot of what we do already does connect to those Sustainable Development Goals. So there is a lot of climate change programming that we either have in our galleries or in our back pockets. So it's not always about reinventing the wheel. And then again, this is sort of another example of an external partner. We've been doing Arctic Snow Day. So in preparation for our Arctic gallery, we've been connecting with other external subject matter experts and seeing how our guests respond to some messaging around the Arctic and around climate change and how best we might be able to tackle that kind of a topic. And this is actually Parks Canada, but the northern park. So they came down from the Yukon and the Northwest Territories. So partners can often be very close, but I would suggest that sometimes you can look a bit farther afield. And they were actually really excited to travel that far and come down, and they don't always get those outreach opportunities. So you can look a little farther afield sometimes too, I think, and find some interesting folks. But yeah, that's it for me in a nutshell, sort of a whirlwind tour, and I will hand it back over to David now.
They get involved and we have other opportunities to discuss and share ideas. I've enjoyed the previous presentations a great deal and look forward to everyone's comments and questions following my brief remarks. I don't think there's going to be a lot of time for discussions today, but hopefully this will be the start of many discussions in the future. As Peter mentioned, I am a museum exhibit designer. Over the years, I've had the opportunity and the honor to work on several cultural centers for First Nations. We found some content messages are consistent for all the centers we've worked on. For example, respect for land and water, respect for all life, all things are connected, and the importance of family and sharing. I suggest if we're ever going to successfully address climate change as individuals or as museums, we will need to appreciate and embrace these messages and stories, born out of thousands of years of living together on the land successfully. We are currently working on a project in the interior. It's an Indigenous cultural center, and there's 5 communities that have come together to share their history and stories at 108 Mile House. We facilitated 2 day-long workshops with each of the 5 communities. We needed to find out what each community wanted to communicate within their center. Our findings shows all 5 communities had some collective messages in common. For example, they wanted to say directly that they have a passion for respect for the land and water. The season round is also important, along with language. So these are messages that were consistent. Each community also had some stories they wanted to tell separately related to spirituality, connections and cycles, values through elders, movement on the land, and peacemaker teachings. Peacemaker is a mystical person from the past who taught about the importance of understanding the land and living with the land and water. I've got a PowerPoint. As you can see, this is the introduction to it, and it shows the 5 communities that are involved. And next slide, please. This slide shows you the territory that they occupy and the positioning of the communities within the territories. You can see from the map below that it's a very large area of BC, and they've lived here, like I say, for thousands of years, and have suffered a great deal with the coming of the European cultures. One of the things that a little footnote on this is that they said they didn't want to go into anything that involves blame or shame, and so this is a very positive approach. Even though they've been through a lot, they are determined to state values and opinions that are healthy and have kept them going and through some very difficult times, and want to share them with us so we can learn. Next slide, please. This is the layout of the space. You can see it's a large rectangle. It's a very simple building. We try to keep it inexpensive as possible for fundraising purposes. The lower section of the building is a small cafe and some workshops and a storage area. The upper section is all exhibits, and as you can see, the collective messages and community stories are on the right in that large circle. The lesser circle is expressing and showing off artifacts and objects from the 5 unique communities, and of course an entrance close to the entrance way, which is in the center of the building. Next slide, please. This shows you kind of more like, this is a sort of exploratory model, just developing some ideas, but we really wanted to emphasize the fact that the land is beautiful, the land is important, and the seasons are important. So we made 4 large photo murals that surround a space as a backdrop. Each mural features a different season and shows off what happens in each of the 4 seasons. That's those little circles in front of the photo mural, and the circle to your bottom right show you all the activities that happen in each of the seasons. So you understand that connectedness to land and connectedness to activities connected to the climate and the seasons. So in the center of the space, there's a large exhibit on language, and because that was so passionate, they were so passionate about making sure that language had to be retained and developed if they were going to save their culture. You can see dispersed in between the language exhibits and the photo murals, these zigzag kind of structures. They take the community stories, and so each side gets a different community story so that they get a chance to express themselves as a community separately, as well as sharing this collective view of what's important to them all. And off to the left, of course, is where they have cases, so we can show artifacts and objects that relate to each of the 5 cultures. Next slide, please. Now, this is an important part of the exercise we went through. We realized that during the winter months, there weren't going to be many visitors, so we wanted to create a space that allowed changes to happen and allowed for some more community-related activities for each of the 5 communities. So all the exhibit structures are designed to be removed and stacked flat. So the premise is that in the summer months, you've got a presentation space, and in the winter months, you've got an activity space. And we really want to make sure that every square foot of this building is used every month of the year. So you can see that in this arrangement, we left the tall panels, but taken everything else out so we can do presentations, workshops, and banquets, and rent the space out as well to generate some revenue during the down months. Next slide, please. So to give them the tools they needed to make changes without waste, we developed 3 different exhibit techniques. One is a structural case come panel structure, which is on your left, and you can take it down and put it up very quickly. You can do it in a day, and you can create cases of different sizes, and they stack flat, so you can take them out of the way and put them in the back when you don't want them, or you can rearrange them to show off big or smaller objects, because they can make small cases or large cases. In the center, you see those tall panels. We wanted something that can divide up the space so you can create different rooms. So these panels hang off a unistrut grid on the ceiling and then are joined together. They're 3 foot wide and they fit together to create larger walls, but in essence, they are removable as well. And so that the Reach, this is a shot of the Reach Gallery out in Abbotsford, and they change their shows every few months. And so they have the flexibility to tell different stories and make a connection between art and history. On the right-hand side, you have panels that we intended though to create some panels that allowed you to change stories without throwing out materials. So this is a panel system and a palette system that uses magnets to hold the graphics on, and the graphics can be changed and replaced, but you still have the backing material intact. So you can continue to tell stories and you can spend all your time developing stories and not spending money on structures. Like Viviane pointed out, she's decided to recycle discarded material. We are trying to suggest that if you build structures or graphics, build them in such a way that they can be changed easily so you're constantly renewing without waste. Just to conclude, I wanted to say that for me, Indigenous knowledge expresses important human values that museums might keep in mind when addressing climate change issues. Values like love and respect for the land, each other, and all living things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you also to Viviane and to Jennifer, really, for your insightful thoughts there. I forgot to mention that Viviane Gosselin is a member of the Canadian Museums of Climate Change and is really responsible for our communications and social media engagement. Viviane, would you like to speak to this slide, please?
And I should say this is it really is a team. Our communication department here, the Museum of Vancouver, is coordinating this, and we have some very keen educators and museum professional in Ontario who are also helping out. So this is the coalition's main platform, the website. There are opportunities to access resources under the resource menu, but also I would flag that the social media platforms of Facebook and Twitter are extremely active and dynamic and constantly sharing news and case studies, new guidelines that have been developed from museums around the world. And so these become like kind of have that scaffolding effects where they inspire, they guide our actions here. And so I would encourage people to visit the website and look at our Twitter feed and Facebook, and as well as contribute stories. So there is opportunities for people to share their struggle, their struggles, but their successes. I think it's good to see and hear about a transformation. It doesn't have to be all just about successes, but also how people tackle the challenges. And we want to hear about you. So if people are interested in sharing, we would love to put their stories on our blog post, on our blog. Yeah. Peter, do you want to continue?
Thanks so much, Viviane. Really appreciate that. So I think at this stage, we have about 10 minutes left. This is a chance for us to hear from participants. You're welcome to type it in the chat box downstairs, down at the bottom. You'll see that there's a message from Joe Borsato at the Potato House, who talked about, just briefly, if anybody's not able to see it, but it says, the willingness to adopt climate change issues and programming really is down to the executive level, which tends to be absent because of some of the commercial or business interests that those executives have. If anybody else has any more questions, please type away. So while we're waiting for anybody to ask any questions, I just want to say that we are excited about the conference in October in 2020 in Surrey. As Ryan mentioned, there will be a theme around climate change. Hopefully, we could start to develop some sort of some sessions, some workshops where people can participate and show practices from their own institutions. But I think most importantly, we do want to find out what's happening also around the world and see what kind of benchmarks there are. If anybody has any benchmarks from other communities, if you could share them either now or you can certainly let us know down the line.
Hi, David. It's Ryan. It looks like we have a question about the use of solar power at facilities, asking if our speakers could address energy and sustainability of their facilities.
Sure, I could start. So great question, because as I said, this is like the building and practices is one of many, like it's a multi-pronged approach. So in our case, we are part of the city museum. So we're working with the city of Vancouver and conducting evaluation of our energy use, our carbon footprint. And so looking at upgrading and like the HVAC system, and starting also with incremental change. So upgrading gallery lighting to use low energy LED is something that we're doing at the moment, but certainly looking at our energy consumption as the actual building is, and this is a building built in the 60s. It's here to stay, but it needs some major revamping. So working on with the city and in changing incrementally a whole bunch of things, but HVAC is a priority.
One of the issues that I've done a little bit of studies and have read other studies about how wasteful museums and galleries are, and it's quite astounding because we like to change things from time to time and we never think about reuse, like Viviane's pointed out. So we wind up throwing a lot out, and I think if an evaluation is necessary, it's evaluating what you decide to junk, what winds up in the landfill every year because of your activities. And I think you'd be surprised too and have to reevaluate how you approach your exhibits to provide change without making the waste that we're so good at.
Jennifer, do you have anything to add about using solar power at the telecenter? No, sorry, don't have Jennifer there. I think there's a question here from Emily about museums measuring the success of these initiatives. David or Viviane, if you have anything there to mention.
What was the question? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Are museums measuring the success of any of these initiatives?
Good question.
So on our side, we're not expecting a 30-minute experience to transform people radically. It's incremental, but what we need to do, and we do exit survey, but what we have started to do, and started 2 years ago, but this is more needed than ever, is doing longitudinal studies. So calling the same people when they give us permission 3 months and 6 months after their visit to see if and how the conversation that they had with people in the gallery, how it impacted different kind of actions or conversations after they left the museum. So we're looking at, so we have done that with Rewilding Vancouver, and they were kind of a new realization and resolutions that took place on a small percentage, and yet it was encouraging. And we felt that as a result, environmental literacy became one of our pillar, and that was in 2014.
Oh, thanks, Viviane. Yeah, just on our side, when it comes to doing our programming with youth in our nature sketch, we found that working with a lot of kids who have anxiety, particularly around environmental anxiety around climate change, having them engage within sort of the topics and get the subject become more associated with the subject matter helps there. And so we saw some really immediate impact from our programming. Jennifer, I notice you're back on. Or could you speak to the question around solar panels, if you're able?
Sure. We don't have solar panels on our building now. I think it's one thing that we've been considering, and certainly as we do a new build, any new build is required to achieve a LEED Silver, but we're hopefully planning to go beyond that. But it does give us an interesting opportunity to sorry, I'll step back. Our building has been built and expanded at different times. So our original building is from 1984, but we have expansions from 2001 and 2012. So some of the systems, especially in those sort of older parts, are reaching the end of their lifetime. So we have an opportunity now to look at how we can link some of those systems together in a better way. And we're going through the process of getting those baseline numbers from our different energy uses and seeing, setting those goals and where do we want to be and figuring out how we can get there at this point.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Chris K. The question is, are museums, galleries encouraging carpooling and where viable work from home on occasion with options for staff? I don't know if any of the participants can speak to that.
Yeah, I can take that one. So we encourage people to work from home. It all depends of what kind of workers you are, but myself, I work day, week from home, and several colleagues do the same. There's also, for visitors, we have in our parking bike sharing, car sharing program, and we are, as a organization, also a member of a car sharing program. So fabrication team, for example, they are cycling to work. So when they need to go and get some material, for example, and meet with the construction community, they can take, they use the car sharing program.
Great,
and I mean, part of that could be advocating for better transit routes, if that's possible. One thing that we're exploring, and I saw that some colleagues from Spark are on this call, they have electric car plugins, I believe, at their site. And so that's something that we're exploring as well, too.
One radical approach that we explored at one time a few years ago was if you have a small core of manager types working in the museum and you're bringing in outsiders to do exhibits, then a lot of the work can be done outside of the museum, and you'd change every time you did an exhibit. You'd have a core group that would manage it, but you'd have people from outside to come and give new ideas and new designs, and you'd constantly be renewing not only the exhibits, but people involved in creating them. And it would reduce your need for workspace considerably if all the work was being done outside of the museums that they're being created for.
Yeah, thank you. And just to add to that discussion, for the Bateman Foundation, we've transferred all our folders and files to Google Drive, which means people are able to access their working documents and shared documents through that kind of cloud system, which means that people can, we encourage people to work from home or work outside of the office if they need to. And that makes it much easier. We have a question from Louise Avery. How do you address waste from receptions, gatherings created in programming?
Well, in our cases, we have the waste management that's administered and managed by the city. And so there's several different bins where staffers and caterers and contractors are asked to divest and to properly store waste in the proper bin. So.
Yeah.
And also they use, I mean, anything we have potluck now that we no longer use paper or plastic.
Mm-hmm.
And I can add to that, we just revamped our in-house recycling program, so we are doing a better job of sorting and separating our waste. And I mean, that's a very municipal directed piece, so we sort of have to make sure we're well aligned with our own cities' waste streams, but we also do a lot of recycling. So we get folks to bring in materials that we can use in camps or in other areas. We just did a big, as part of this year's International Science Center Day, a big recycling, upcycling program where you could go into our science garage, our makerspace, and build with recycled materials. So getting guests to think about that within the context of their own lives as well.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. So I'm just conscious of time. It is 1:03. Unless there's any more questions, I would just want to offer my thanks to Viviane, to Jennifer, and David for contributing today. It's been wonderful. Hope that this addressed a lot of people's, have some areas there that they can explore further. Be happy to answer any more questions and look forward to chatting and seeing you all soon.
Peter, can I just underline the fact that we'd love to have a dialogue and we'd like to continue this in some way. Please take a look at the website that we've created for I don't know if you've had that image up long enough for people to record the information on the coalition, but yeah, there it is there. So please look it up, and we'd love to hear comments, not just questions. We'd love to hear what you think and what you're doing, and hopefully we can build on it and keep this dialogue going.
Absolutely. And thank you to Ryan and Nisa and the staff of the BCMA for organizing this webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.